Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for your patience. We are thrilled. I think these are all the students. I think everyone has arrived. And so thank you so much for joining us and being here today. On behalf of our Courts and Community Committee, I want to welcome you to King County Superior Court. I'm Judge Jamie Hawk. I'm one of the judges here at the court, and we are so excited and thrilled to have you with us. And here in the courthouse and in the courtroom. And I know last night this room was packed. We had over 200 high school students competing in the YMCA mock trial competition. And I know at least a couple of you, there's one of the teams or two of the teams that competed last night. And now we've got another 100 of you spending the day with us, which is really, really exciting for us. Today, we're gonna be talking a lot about the law and the Constitution, and how lawyers and judges rely on the law and Constitution to effectuate justice. We also hope by the end of today that you will appreciate how the law and Constitution can be relied upon to bring change and more justice. And we want you to see yourselves as future change makers and leaders in the community. So first, I want to give you just an overview and schedule of our time together today. First, you will learn about Justice Thurgood Marshall, who we are remembering today. We will then hear from multiple attorneys and some court staff who will share words with you. After those speeches and presentations, we'll have a lunch break together here in this courtroom and then in some other rooms very close by on this floor. After lunch, we are going to break into smaller groups based on the number on your name tag. So please don't lose your name tags. Keep those with you. And then after the small group discussions, we're going to return back here to the presiding courtroom to close out the day around 2 o'clock, and then hopefully have you on your way around 2:15 or so. Has anyone heard of Justice Thurgood Marshall? Raise your hand. A few of you? Okay, great. His portrait is here on the wall, and then you're going to hear more about him now. We have a brief video for you, and then you're going to learn a little bit about his work as a lawyer, later as a judge on our nation's highest courts. Thurgood Marshall argued 32 cases before the United States Supreme Court to advance civil rights. He was one of our country's preeminent civil rights attorneys when he was first appointed to be a federal judge by President John F. Kennedy, and later appointed by President Lyndon B. Johnson to the United States Supreme Court. He was the first African-American justice on the highest court in our country, the U.S. Supreme Court. So now I'm going to play this video, and then I'm very excited to introduce our keynote speaker, and we'll get started with that right after the video.
The following program was produced by the United States Courts.
Thurgood Marshall, the civil rights crusader, a man who was instrumental in ending legal segregation and later became the first African-American justice of the Supreme Court. In this special series we call Moments in History, we remember a man who challenged our legal system to create a more perfect union and forever change our country. Thurgood Marshall was born in 1908 in Baltimore, Maryland. His mother, an educator, and father, a railroad porter, steered Marshall into a law career. After graduating with honors from Lincoln University, Marshall applied to the University of Maryland Law School, but was denied because he was African American. So he traveled for an hour daily to Howard University Law School under the tutelage of a prominent NAACP attorney, Charles Hamilton Houston.
One of the suggestions made to Thurgood Marshall by Charles Hamilton Houston was to go to the deepest South, into those pockets of the country where resistance against equality and desegregation were the toughest, and pay attention to the people, listen to them, hear their stories, and understand that you are working for a cause that's bigger than being a lawyer, bigger than being a law graduate, bigger than even anything you can imagine in your life. And Thurgood Marshall took on that mantle.
In 1934, Marshall graduated magna cum laude from Howard. The following year, he started a private practice and eventually succeeds his mentor, Charles Houston, to become the NAACP's chief counsel. During this time, Marshall systematically dismantles the 1896 Plessy versus Ferguson ruling that upheld racial segregation under the separate but equal doctrine. He argued 32 civil rights cases before the Supreme Court, winning 29.
He wanted to establish the building blocks of earlier cases. He didn't want this issue to come up early in the litigation. And I learned a lot about how a person can try to influence the development of an issue over a long period of time.
In fact, it was 13 years before Marshall had a chance to challenge separate but equal with the Brown versus Board of Education case in 1954. The ruling ended segregation in the U.S. By now, Thurgood Marshall is a household name, but not everyone is in favor of the landmark decision.
It took an enormous amount of guts. He told us the story about how he'd have to move sometimes 2 or 3 times a night from home to home in order to stay safe. He told us the story about how he was very close to being lynched one time. It wasn't just his client, it was he who was in danger.
Justice Marshall was a great admirer of the man I wound up working for, Judge Harold Tyler. And Tyler had been an assistant attorney general in charge of civil rights. One day in the fall of 1960, Marshall was down in New Orleans and was advised that the Klan was coming to get him that very night. He called Tyler, he had Tyler's home number. Within an hour, the FBI picked up Marshall and put him in a secure location and saw him through that. And Marshall credited Tyler with saving his life.
The death threats didn't stop Marshall. After the Brown versus the Board of Education ruling, Thurgood continued to defend civil rights demonstrators until he was appointed in 1961 to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit. Of all his rulings, none were overturned by the Supreme Court, and by 1967, Thurgood Marshall became the first African-American Supreme Court justice.
It was fascinating to see this multiple aspects of his personality, the personable, sociable storyteller, the precise taskmaster, just an amazing and remarkable, unique human being.
What was most delicious about the clerkship were these stories. And they ranged from hanging out with Langston Hughes and Lena Horne, Joe Louis, meeting with Prince Philip, helping draft the Kenyan Constitution. Every single story was like gold.
One of Marshall's favorite stories, and Marshall told stories all the time. Many of them were about race relations, many of them were serious subjects, but he always would tell a story with his booming laugh, and they always had a funny ending, even when he was making a very serious point. All the new judges were supposed to come up for a photo shoot, and the photographer blew a fuse while setting up his equipment. So they called for an electrician. Who should walk into the room next? Thurgood Marshall. The secretary looked up at him and said, "Oh, you must be the electrician." He laughed about the story, and why did he laugh? Because at the time the trade unions in New York were all segregated, and he said, "That woman must be crazy to think that I could be a member of the electricians union in New York City."
By the time I was clerking, was very interested in hiring clerks who wanted to teach. And we were involved in the hiring process. And we asked him, why do you want people who want to teach? And he had a very long view about influence. He was very explicit. He said, of course, I want the smartest people. But he also said, I want people who will pass on the lessons to a next generation.
In 1991, Thurgood Marshall announced he was retiring from the bench.
It came as a complete shock to us. The morning he did it, he called us in and he said, "Well, I've decided to give it up." And I said, "You're kidding." He said, "No, I've already sent the letter to the president." There was this part of me who, until he said that, I was going to try to talk him out of it. "No, you can't do this, you can't do it." He had already done it. And as far as I could tell, nobody in his chambers knew.
And when reporters asked him why,
well, I'm old. I'm getting old and coming apart.
2 years later, Thurgood Marshall passed away at the age of 84.
Or the day of the funeral, we went to the National Cathedral. President Clinton was there, the Vice President, many senators, all these important Washington people. And at the end, word got around that the law clerks were invited to the burial at Arlington. So we went there, and I assumed that a lot of Washington dignitaries would be there, but that was not the case. And it was the law clerks and the family, and Justice's family was small. And Sissy Marshall at one point turned to us and said, Thurgood regarded you as part of his family. And I guess we knew, and he wanted you to be here for this moment. And that was really wonderful.
What made Thurgood Marshall an exemplary leader, in my view, is that he never stopped having utter empathy for common folk, people who were disadvantaged, and he dedicated his life to using the law to help those folk, regardless of color.
It reinforced my interest in public service. When you have a role model like that, when a person like that is putting his life on the line in the interest of the ideals, it's very hard to want to do anything other than to find a way to give back. There's almost nothing any of us can do in this generation that rivals the level of commitment and risk that he put on the line, for the causes he believed in.
today you can find numerous memorials from coast to coast honoring Justice Thurgood Marshall, from courthouses to national airports, even the building I'm standing in now. For the U.S. courts in the Thurgood Marshall Federal Judiciary Building, I'm Bridget Lyles. Thanks for watching.
Okay, so we've learned a little bit about Justice Marshall and how he relied on the law and Constitution as an attorney to dismantle legal segregation and advance civil rights, and as a judge to protect rights. Now, I am very, very pleased to introduce our special guest. We are joined today by a nationally recognized lawyer, Jeffery Robinson, who is founder and CEO of the Who We Are Project. His film and works expose and promote historical truths of anti-Black racism in the United States. He graduated from Harvard Law School and has been a lawyer with over 4 decades of legal experience tackling criminal and racial justice issues in America. He educates people across the country and beyond, and we are very lucky that he lives here in Seattle with us. I first met Mr. Robinson many years ago when I was a new public defender. He later inspired me to take a legal job at the same organization where he was working. He was already a civil rights lawyer, and he inspired me to work as one too. And I know that he will inspire all of you today. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Jeffery Robinson.
Can folks hear me? My microphone is on. I want to thank you all for being here. And so there are just a couple things I'd like to say as we get started, and then I'm going to open it up for questions and discussion. That looks good. What you saw about Justice Marshall on the screen, it was all factually true. This man had an incredible career, but there's something important. It sounded like all that stuff he did by himself, and he didn't. You heard the name Charles Hamilton Houston as somebody that was a mentor of Thurgood Marshall. Charles Hamilton Houston was the person that designed the legal strategy that resulted in Brown versus the Board of Education. If you asked Thurgood Marshall what his role was in Brown versus the Board, he would have told you, like he told others, I carried Charles Hamilton Houston's briefcase. Charles Hamilton Houston won 5 cases in the U.S. Supreme Court under the legal doctrine of separate but equal. 5 cases where he got young African Americans into a graduate school, even though separate but equal was the law. And so my point is that no one person is going to move the country in the right direction. It's going to take all of us. And with that in mind, you just saw Thurgood Marshall. This is an article about him graduating first in his class from Howard Law School. And you see it says, Baltimore boy finishes law. I was born in 1956. Y'all are supposed to say, oh no, that can't be, you look so young. Thank you so much. A very perceptive young woman over here. Oh my gosh. I saw children in the 8th and 9th grade call my parents boy or girl, call my parents by their first name. And it wasn't a matter of being casual. It was a sign of disrespect that was deep-seated in what was happening, especially in the Deep South in this country during that time. So the fact that he is in his mid-20s at least, graduating from Howard Law School, and the article calls him a boy, tells you something about the time that he was growing up in and the work that he was doing. And then we saw these pictures, you know, as a young lawyer, as a more experienced lawyer, as a Supreme Court justice. And there are many things that this man said about our country and about our responsibility as citizens in this country. One of them is that the truth is more than a mental exercise. And this is where I want to start, because y'all are in the crosshairs. And I'm using that visual. It is a violent visual. I apologize, but I'm using it on purpose. Your minds are in the crosshairs. There are 44 states in this country either passing or considering laws that will restrict what you can be taught about the truth of our past, will restrict what you can be taught in school. Why would somebody be so interested in restricting what you're taught? If it's the truth, why would somebody want to keep that from you? Well, let me talk about the truth for just a minute. Go to every dictionary and you'll get different definitions, and I tried to cobble together the clearest one that I could find. The truth is an accurate and complete description or representation of facts, events, or principles. Now, we all know what the truth is. And the debates today about, well, is this true? Is that true? We all know what the truth is when we can see it and recognize it. But this is a definition that I'm going to ask you to think about as you're going through the program today. And if you want to be accurate and complete, and that's what the truth requires, if you want to be accurate and complete, you've got to tell the entire story, not just the good parts of it. You've got to tell the whole thing. I taught a law school class at Boston College University. I went out there just for 3 months and taught this class. And this young student in an exam or in a paper wrote this, and it just blew me away. Without truth and knowledge, what would be the purpose of education? If you're being educated about something and somebody is extracting both truth and knowledge from what you're being told, what would be the reason for that? The first answer that comes to mind is control. Education lacking truth and therefore concealing knowledge is used to control those being educated by promoting specific narratives used to control those being educated. That's you. That's you. And the reason people are coming after your minds and your brains is that what you see happening today with the new administration, what you see happening is a bet on the future. And it can't work unless you go along with it. And I am sorry to have this conversation with you at such a young age, but the time for playing around is over. We are going to make some very stark choices in this country, and your brains and the brains of young people like you are what's on the table, and people are going to be coming for you. And I'm going to ask you to think critically about what you're given and what you're not given. Thurgood Marshall also said, our whole constitutional heritage rebels at the thought of giving the government the power to control men's minds. Now, he's a little sexist. He couldn't say people's minds, but you get what he's saying, right? Giving the government the right to decide whether you get taught the whole truth or not. This is not something new. How many of y'all have ever read this book? I see some hands. Those of you who put your hands up, would you agree with me that you could characterize this book as bizarre? Anybody disagree? I didn't think so. This is one of the most bizarre books I've ever read. Naked Lunch by 1984. We'll talk about Naked Lunch at the end. 1984. And what comes from this book is a system of control. Controlling what people think. And what they say is, who controls the past controls the future. And who controls the present controls the past. So what does this mean, like in real day language? If you want to control the future, control the past. If you want to control what goes on as we go forward, control what people know about what happened before. Because if you can control the story about what happened before and take out the bad parts, then you can convince people that going down this road is the right way to go, when in actuality, if they knew the whole truth, they'd say that road leads to hell. Control the past to control the future. And if you want to control the past, control the present. Control what you're being taught right now. Start erasing from schools in America the actual facts of the role of anti-Black racism and racism in general, the role that has played in our country. Just erase those facts from the past, and if you do, you can convince people going forward that we're doing something that's absolutely fine. So, I want to talk to you about indoctrination. And once again, you may have heard, for those of y'all who got to see the film, Who We Are, A Chronicle of Racism in America, one of the things that, it's a film I was involved in, and one of the things I say in that film, talking about the history of anti-Black racism specifically in our country, is don't believe me, I'm just some guy. Y'all never met me before. Don't believe me, go and check what I say, because facts and the truth can be found. And that is what is so important about the concept of indoctrination. Here are the dictionary definitions that I think will be helpful for us. It's the process of repeating an idea or belief to someone until they accept it without criticism or question. They're eating dogs and cats in Ohio. Those immigrants are eating dogs and cats in Ohio. They're eating dogs and cats in Ohio. Our pets are being eaten by immigrants and dogs and cats in Ohio and immigrants. And they repeated it, and some people believed it, even though it had no truth, No single fact to support it at all. Repeat something and ask people to believe it without criticism or question. Teaching a person or group to accept a set of beliefs uncritically, meaning, well, DEI is bad. It's reverse racism. Now, don't think about what DEI is, or CRT, critical race theory. That's evil. Anybody that says that to you, ask them, what is critical race theory? And I'm willing to bet you that you won't get an answer, because people have no idea what it is. But we can call it something that's evil and say it's evil, and then people think it's evil, and if they don't judge it critically, then all of a sudden, this concept that's just, pardon my French, I know there are ninth graders in the room, but only time, this concept that is just bull gets accepted as the truth. Forcing someone to accept a particular belief or set of beliefs and not allow them to consider any others. When people say, oh, Jeff, you know, what you're doing is trying to indoctrinate people with your idea about racism, I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm just telling the entire truth. I'm telling the part of the truth about our history that's been left out. I'm not saying anything should be taken out of your curriculum. I'm not saying you shouldn't be taught something. I'm the one saying you should be taught more than what we're being taught. So indoctrination involves limiting what you can consider, because they know if you consider the truth when you're being given a false narrative, they know, and history has shown, that the truth is the one thing a false narrative cannot survive. This is the process of indoctrination. They change the way you're thinking until you think like everybody else. And this is the result of indoctrination. We've seen these images of see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. This is different. Look at these images closely. This is someone will prevent you from seeing something. Someone will prevent you from hearing something. Someone will prevent you from speaking something. The talk I'm giving you right now would probably be banned in numerous states across the country. Your minds are in the crosshairs, and that's why it is important for you to be critical thinkers as you become adults. Here is an example, and then I'm going to finish up. Nathan Bedford Forrest. In my hometown of Memphis, Tennessee, this is a national monument. It was placed in 1956, which was 2 years after Brown versus the board. And if you know the history that sometimes isn't taught, what you'll find is that after Brown versus the board was passed, a lot of politicians in the southern states were doing everything they could to resist it. Because they're like, yeah, the Supreme Court is saying we have to desegregate the schools, but let's see them make us. Does that sound familiar in terms of what you're hearing today about people in the administration saying, the courts can't make us do something. We can do something whether the courts want us to or not. This is how Nathan Bedford Forrest was described. In a house which stood here in antebellum days, that's before the war, before the Civil War, lived Nathan Bedford Forrest. Born in Middle Tennessee, he spent his early life on a Mississippi plantation. Following marriage in 1845, he came to Memphis, where his business enterprises made him wealthy. He was for several years an alderman and enlisted for the Confederacy in June of 1861. That's the story of Nathan Bedford Forrest. Or is it? Because a bunch of students like yourselves said, that is, I lied, second time, bull. And they went and did the research. And they went to the Tennessee State Historical Commission. And they said, we have to change this. And this is what happened. You'll get a copy of this PowerPoint, so I won't read you the whole thing, but this tells the story of how Nathan Bedford Forrest was one of the most vicious slavers in Memphis, Tennessee. How he made millions of dollars selling flesh. How he broke up families and sold children one way and sold adults the other way. How the phrase, have you ever heard the phrase being sold down the river? That phrase comes from the slave trade, mainly in Memphis, Tennessee, because it sits right on the Mississippi River. And Nathan Bedford Forrest's home was equidistant from the rail yard, which was bringing in enslaved people from the East Coast, and the Mississippi River. And he would buy people coming in, hold them in pens, and then sell them down the river for huge amounts of money. This is how he became a millionaire. And this historical marker tells that story, and it's so complex, they had to put more on the other side of it. This is the whole story of Nathan Bedford Forrest. And now, what's interesting is, I don't think you'll be able to see it. The old Nathan Bedford Forrest marker is about 10 yards away from the new marker. So they are in conversation with each other. So people who are visiting Memphis, which has all kinds of things, got the best barbecue in the world, don't debate me because you'll lose. It's got great music, and it's got these historical things that happened there. And now, if you read that 1956 marker about Nathan Bedford Forrest, and then you see 10 yards away, oh, that looks like another one, and you walk over and read this one, you're going to be saying to yourself, wait a minute, what happened here? And this is an example of indoctrination. If you erase the truth, people will forget it happened, and stuff that you see happening today will sound like it's new when it's really old. Where you see wrong or inequality or injustice, speak out, because this is your country, your democracy. Protect it and pass it on. That's what I wanted to share with you in terms of thinking about Thurgood Marshall and what his legacy means. We are in important times in our country, and if you start learning your history, what you'll understand is none of this is new. None of this is created by Project 2025. In 1837, a man named John C. Calhoun, who was twice Vice President of the United States, twice a senator from South Carolina, he wrote an article saying, we got to stop teaching our children about abolition. Because if we teach them about abolition, slavery is done for. So this concept of erasing the truth from what we teach young minds, it has always been around. It is as old as the phrase indoctrination. And that's why I want you to see it today as, is it scary? Oh, heck yes, it's scary. But this is nothing new. This has been conquered before. And one of the ways you conquer this is by educating yourself about the truth about our history, making sure that the people you talk to when you have conversations are aware of information that they may not be aware of. Because this is literally, we want this information to be viral. Because if it's viral, there is no antidote to the truth. That's what I wanted to introduce to you, and I would like to spend the rest of the time answering whatever questions you may have about anything I've said up here, or I know some of y'all wrote questions about the film, and I'd like to answer those as well. So where should we start? I appreciate it. Where should we start? Somebody over here had a hand up, I thought. Oh, I just wanted to know what abolition was. Thank you. I used to have, and I violated the rule. As a lawyer, I had this rule. If you're using a word that has more than 3 syllables, either use a different word or explain it. And that's not because I'm not like insulting anybody, but it's just like we assume that people know all kinds of things when they really don't. Abolition was the movement even early around the time the Constitution was being written. It was a movement where people were saying the very idea of slavery is wrong. And so we can't have slavery. And so there were debates when the Constitution was being written about, is slavery going to be allowed and is slavery not going to be allowed? When people say to you, it's an overstatement to say that America was founded in large part on white supremacy. If people say that to you, what I would encourage you to do is go and look at the founding documents, because human beings have this trait. This is a racial trait, meaning the human race. When we think we're doing something important, we write stuff down. And so when people were at the Constitution, they couldn't tweet or anything like that, but they wrote long, long letters to each other explaining why they were thinking the way they think. And so some people will tell you James Madison, the father of the Constitution, was so against slavery that he refused to have that word in the original Constitution. And that is absolutely right. He said, I don't want that word in the original Constitution. I don't want it to be clear in our founding document that we are a country that allows ownership of human beings. He said that. He also said during the debates, are you crazy? Of course we're going to have slavery. There are too many states that want slavery. We're not going to get rid of that institution. Do you know how much money is being made on this institution? So like many human beings, he was more than one thing. Sometimes he contradicted himself, and that's what I'm saying about telling the whole story and not part of it. So understanding that abolition was something that was really going on from the birth of the country and even before. So there were always a group of people that were saying it is wrong to own human beings as property, but the money and the power that came from that institution suppressed that view for quite some time. Yes, ma'am.
Hold on just a moment. Please use the microphone.
So I want you to I want you to ask your question. I just want to tell you real quickly. Y'all probably can't see it. I have an earring in this ear, and that's like passe and like nothing, right? Well, in 1979, for a black male to have an earring in his ear was kind of radical. And I was at Harvard Law School, and I had never been around anybody and any institution like this before. And I saw all this money being passed out to students who were going into corporate law. And I'm like, man, that looked good. And I just didn't want to do it. So one night, after a lot of beverage, my friends and I pierced my right ear because I figured there's no way a corporate law firm will hire me if I have an earring in my ear. And I was right. So go ahead.
I appreciate that. So my question is, what was it like to study at Harvard Law as a black man? And then on top of that, what was it like learning about laws that were made in the US purely against black people? And what was it like sort of like approaching that revelation of just how purely racist our country is and learning that at one of the highest institutions in our country?
What I would say is that I did not learn a lot about the way that racism was baked into our founding documents and into our laws. I learned some of that at Harvard Law School, but I did not learn a lot of that at Harvard Law School. Harvard, at the time I was there, they wouldn't say there was a quota, but every class was about 520 people. It's the biggest law school in the country. Every class was about 520 people, and in the 3 years I was there, there were 52 people in my class, 51 people in another class, 50 in one class, and then 54, I think. So it was right at 10% no matter what. And however they came to that figure, they came to that figure. There were definitely professors that were challenging kind of the status quo. And so that was helpful, but I will acknowledge a lot of what I learned about this history, I learned after law school. And that's one of the things that I'd like to impress on everybody. Do your teachers really think that a classroom is the only place you can learn stuff? I heard, and y'all confirm if I'm right, there's this thing called the internet where you can go and find out information. So www.thewhoweareproject.org. When we tell you something on our website, we'll give you the source of the information. So you can go and check it yourself and see that it's accurate and complete. And so part of what I experienced was that my own interest in the subject brought me more information than the formal education at Harvard. And, you know, there were, I'm sure there were people who thought, you know, I was an affirmative action admittee because I was Black. And I don't know, my grades were pretty good and my LSAT was pretty good, but I don't know. And if I was an affirmative action admission, I don't care. Here's another concept there. Affirmative action and DEI is about taking Black people and other people of color who are not as qualified and giving them jobs. See, you give jobs to people who are underqualified or unqualified when you have DEI. DEI is reverse racism because it lets people who are not qualified take these jobs. How many times have you heard variations of that in the past 3 years? And so, what are they against? Is it diversity? Let's have a conversation about that. Is it equity? Let's have a conversation about that. Is it inclusion? Let's have a conversation about that. Once again, it's like CRT. What is it that you're objecting to? Because I will simply ask you to consider if appointing a man named Robert Kennedy Jr., who has no medical degree, no training in public health, is an established and admitted person who is against vaccinations and who looks at deaths from the measles down in Texas and says, what are you going to do? To me, that is an example of what DEI is all about. DEI is making sure that underqualified white people don't get jobs over better qualified people of color. But that requires somebody to acknowledge, oh, there's been a system that has been holding back qualified people of color. And if we acknowledge that, then we actually have to do something about it. And so now we get to this whole concept of what you erase from history. Because when you hear "Make America Great Again," my question is always, when was that? Tell me the time when America was great again. Because whenever that time is, if it's going back in time, whenever that time was, there were a whole lot less people that looked like me, a whole lot less people who were women, a whole lot less people who were other people of color that were doing what's happening, doing what we're doing right now. It was a lot worse going back. So whatever time it was when America was great, the question is, well, it was great for who? So that's a long answer to that question, but I think the real thing is that your education in a school, whether it's Rainier Beach High School or Harvard Law School or Seattle Prep High School or Cleveland or whatever high school it is, it's valuable. Take from it what you can, but don't assume It's the entire story. And if people are telling you things that don't resonate with what you've learned in other places, ask questions. So far, the president has not signed an executive order saying any student that asks questions about this is going to be arrested. That hasn't happened yet. Yes.
So in the film, you discussed several times this concept of
Oh, I'm sorry.
So in the film, you discussed several times the concept of a tipping point in America. And I know that film was made about like 6 or 7 years ago. And I wanted to know what your thoughts are on how that has progressed in the 7 years since you had that discussion. Have we rolled back? Are we still there? Have we moved forward? Like, what have you made of what's happened since, and how's that affected the tipping point?
You know, that's a great question, and it's one that I have thought about a lot. And I thought about it a lot as we were making that film. As we were making the film, there were young activists that I would have conversations with, and they would say things to me like, you know, George Floyd's murder was such a tipping point. And it was one of the most important events in American history in terms of focusing the country on this issue. Because remember, we were in the middle of the pandemic. Everybody was away from everybody else. We were all staring at our screens. So I'm not trying to downplay the importance of that event. So hear me when I say George Floyd's murder was just another Tuesday. Because murders like that have been happening for hundreds of years in our country. The difference about George Floyd's murder was that young black woman that held up her cell phone and recorded it when the cops were screaming at her, "Stop recording." And that caused what I said earlier. I said about a book called Naked Lunch. Anybody read Naked Lunch? Good. Don't read this book. And I hate to say that, but this book is just, if you think 1984 was kind of bizarre, Naked Lunch, you don't want to go there. But William Burroughs was a Beat Generation author. And so Google Beat Generation to find out who was writing then and what kind of things they were writing. And he was asked to describe, what does that mean, naked lunch? And he said, it's that frozen moment when everyone has to look at what's really on the end of every fork. Think about that concept, that moment when you have to look at what's really on the end of your fork before you put it in your mouth. And it's not about food. It's about that moment. America had a naked lunch moment with police brutality when everybody was watching that George Floyd video. We couldn't call it something else. We couldn't say, oh, if he only had. We couldn't say, oh, he was resisting. He got the frickin' life choked out of him over 9 minutes, and we all had to watch it. So George Floyd wasn't a tipping point. And if you think about it, our country is 400 years old, constitutional and colonial. And in a country with that kind of history, tipping points don't last for an event or a year. They're usually a decade or two long. So my view is we are at the same tipping point in 2025 that we were in when we recorded the theater part of that film on Juneteenth, 2018. We're at the exact same tipping point. We have rolled back some, given what's happened since then, but we are at the same tipping point. And here's the thing about tipping points in a country's history. It's not all about the time that you're pushing forward and making progress. Sometimes it's about the time that you're pushing hardest to prevent from rolling back. And that's where we are right now, a time where we are required to push as hard as we can to prevent rolling back. Just ask yourselves, if we roll back on issues of racial justice in this country, where are we rolling back to? And how long is it going to take to dig out of that hole just to get back to where we are right now? So if there was a time of urgency, a time for all of us to think about, you know, what could I do that I'm not doing now? Just like one thing or two things, an organization, you know, conversations with others. What is it that I could do that I'm not doing now? It would seem to me like this is the time to be thinking about that, because our tipping point is still right where it is. And I think the next 10 to 15 years are going to decide which way it goes, which is why y'all are in the crosshairs. Because think about who's going to be taking over things in this country in the next 10, 15, 20 years. I'm looking at them. Yes?
What does crosshairs mean?
Crosshairs, again, thank you. I should explain myself. He said, what does crosshairs mean? And I said it was a violent thing, and I'm not trying to promote violence, but it's an urgent thing. So if you have a gun, there is a targeting thing that you can look through, and it usually has like a big cross like this. And so those are the crosshairs. So if somebody is in your crosshairs, it means you're focusing on that person. So when I say y'all are in the crosshairs, your minds are in the crosshairs, I'm saying somebody out there is executing a plan over what you get to learn. And they're thinking, if I can prevent you from learning this stuff about racism, then I can convince you to do things that you would never do if you actually knew the truth. That's the meaning of crosshairs. Yes?
Well, a lot of
I'm sorry, I'll take that and then I'll come to you. Go ahead.
Well, I was just wondering that if there's any examples of you when you were younger doing any type of advocacy, because right now, like, the youth is really important to speaking up and having important conversations. So I just wanted to know if there was any moments when you were younger that you did something.
So I knew that I was going to be a criminal defense lawyer when I was 11 years old. I was born, as I said, in 1956. So in March of 1968, I was 11 years old, and there was a sanitation workers strike that was going on in Memphis. And Dr. King had come to Memphis to help lead a protest in support of that sanitation strike, and there was a march scheduled. And Memphis had the biggest snowstorm in recorded history, and the march got canceled. But it's Memphis, so like the one day it snowed 17 inches, the next day it was 60 degrees, so it all melted away very quickly. There was a march that King held, and a bunch of people got arrested. And my father was a high school principal, and he took my older brother and I to that march. And when things started getting chaotic, he told us to run. And my dad was in his 40s by that time, and it really changed my respect for him, because I was 11 and I thought I was kind of an athlete, and I couldn't catch my dad. He had to wait for me in terms of how fast he was running. So I'm like, damn, I didn't realize. But after that march, people went to court. And a lot of the people who had been arrested, they weren't just kids or young people, they were like pastors and educators. And so my dad took me to court. And I sat in court watching these lawyers come out of what seemed to me like nowhere. And they're arguing with the judge about whether people have to stay in jail. And they're talking about something called the First Amendment and the right to free speech. And they're talking about racial injustice. And I was just like, oh my God, who are those guys? And they were guys at that point. It was just men. I didn't see any women in this role. So, you know, my dad was an educator. He was a high school principal. So I asked him, I'm like, Daddy, who are those guys? He says, well, those are lawyers. I'm like, well, how did you get to be one of them? And, you know, he's a high school principal. He's like, well, first you have to get good grades in high school. I'm like, well, that ain't happening. And then he says, you got to go to 4 years of college. And then he says, you got to go to 3 years of law school. And I'm adding these numbers up. And I'm like, I'll be 25 by that time. That's like way too long for me to commit to something. But from that moment, I knew I wanted to be a criminal defense lawyer. And seeing lawyers stand up for people who had been brave enough to get out in the street and express their view on what was wrong in Memphis was a really significant thing. And then, you know, about a week later, King is shot and killed. And so I think that was, I often say that was the time that I grew up, is in April of '68. Yes, sir. Thank you for asking that. He was asking about, there's a moment in the film, at the beginning of the film, where I have a discussion with a man named Braxton Spivey. He is a leader of a group called Flags Across the South, and he and his friends demonstrate on the waterfront in Charleston, South Carolina, right across the way from Fort Sumter, where the first shots of the Civil War were fired, and they have huge Confederate flags. So I had a conversation with him, and I will tell you the truth. We got to South Carolina on a Thursday night. I did a 3-hour presentation at a black high school that Thursday night. On Friday, we went to a plantation and saw just sickening examples of how enslaved people were treated. On Saturday, we went to the Slave Mart, which is also in the film, in downtown Charleston. So it was an ugly, ugly weekend. It was a very difficult weekend. And I actually was sick. I say in the film at the end of the conversation, dude, I'm feeling sick. I kind of need to go. I actually was sick. But it wasn't at least I don't think it was the flu, because when I went back to New York, like the next day, I was fine. I think I was just sick from everything I was experiencing. And I was actually in the hotel room because I was going to sleep until our plane left later that afternoon. And the two directors, Sarah Kunstler and Emily Kunstler, called me and they said, look, we're down here at the waterfront and this guy has signed a release. He says he'll talk to you. You have to come down here. So I went down, and everything about him made me, I'm just trying to be honest, it made me sick. He hated me for who I am. He hated the color of my skin. He saw no problem with the racist views that he expounds both there at the site and on the internet. But I wanted to talk to him about the flag. And one thing I have seen, and one thing I was trained in as a lawyer, is that if you're cross-examining a witness, if you're engaged in a hostile conversation with a witness and you're yelling and screaming and posturing, you may think you're putting on a good show, but a lot of people are just like, when is this going to end so we can get to the facts? When is this going to end so we can hear something? And if you think about it, seeing a white guy and a black guy yell at each other about the Confederate flag, it's kind of like old news. So I wasn't going to yell at him. And I was trained as a lawyer how to cross-examine witnesses that I might personally despise, without yelling at them and letting the jury make up their own mind. I will say that there were maybe 40 or 50 people standing around that were not on camera, because they all saw, you know, there's a black guy with what looked like TV cameras and a bunch of them, and he's talking to this guy who's always here. What's going on? So I was not only talking to him, I was talking to them. And what I did was what I was trained to do as a lawyer, which is, if you're cross-examining somebody, just present them with facts, one at a time, and get them to agree with those facts, one at a time. And at the end of those facts, there's a conclusion that most people will reach. And what I can tell you is that Mr. Spivey contacted us after the film was released. And he said that he was concerned because he thought he looked like a racist. And we were able to say to him, well, dude, you know, you were there. So you know what was said, and Jeff knows what was said, and you know, it was on camera, so we didn't edit anything or change anything, and that's just what you said. I'm not claiming we have changed Braxton Spivey, because I'm sure we haven't. But for some short period of time, Braxton Spivey had cognitive dissonance. And what that means is that point in your brain where you're considering an issue and you're conflicted because there is a moral component that's telling you to go one way and maybe a practical or personal advantage component that's telling you to go another way, and you have cognitive dissonance over what do I do. He did not like the way he appeared with his message. And part of the reason for that was that I didn't yell at him. And I will say, this is one place where the directors and I had a dispute, because I will confess to you, I asked them, if you have seen the movie, you know this. If you haven't, you'll see it if you watch it. I shook his hand at the end of the conversation. And at one point, I asked the filmmakers to take that out of the movie, because I said, I think I regret shaking his hand, because this man saw me as not even a human being. And they said, well, just think about it. Just think about it. And we left it in. And I'm glad we did, because 2 years ago, a Marine Corps officer came up to me who was he's in the JAG Corps, which is the Judge Advocate General's Corps. So it's people in the military that are also lawyers. And he came up to me after seeing the film and he shook my hand and he said, I want to thank you for shaking that guy's hand. And I'm like, I don't understand. And he says, that man is every man in my family. And I'm going to ask my family to watch this film over the holidays. And the fact that you weren't screaming at him, that you were respectful to him, and that you shook his hand at the end, it's going to make it harder for them to say, oh, that's just some black guy that's, yelling about the same old stuff. So part of what I think all of us have to think about is, when we're talking about these issues, what is our goal? Is your goal to show your outrage? Or is your goal to get somebody to think in perhaps a different way than the way they're thinking? And if you think about your goal in how and when and why you speak, I think that can give some content to like the tone with which you bring it in. And we just decided as an organization that we want to call people in as opposed to calling people out. And calling them in is like the conversation I had with Mr. Spivey. And so he could have said, I thought about it and you were right and I was wrong. And I'd say, thank you very much for coming to that conclusion. He hasn't said that. And so I can say, you heard what he said. And he knew it didn't go very well for him. And so he's stuck with what he is. Yes?
You mentioned indoctrination and that erasal of history from our education. Is there anything you give us specific examples of some of that so we know what we should be educating ourselves on right now?
Okay. How many times was slavery protected in the first 5 articles of the original Constitution? Does anybody know? How many times was slavery specifically protected in the first 5 articles of the original Constitution? Don't guess, but just tell me if you know. Does anybody know? Okay. 5. 5 times, and not each article. In Article 1, they did it twice. Article 1, Section 2, Article 1, Section 9, and then 3, 4, and 5. So if you're having a discussion about was America founded in large part on a concept of white supremacy, if you don't know that fact, you could say, well, of course not. Read the documents. It talks about liberty. It talks about, the rights of people. There's nothing in there about white supremacy. Well, if you're protecting slavery 5 times in the first 5 articles, let's understand, it's not like the founders didn't know what slavery was. And here again, this is about history, because if you go back into the colonial records, the things that were done to enslaved people, it's hard to come up with an adjective. And remember, it's like, oh, that was the colonial people. The same colonial people one day were American citizens the next day. So it ain't like these are different people. So that is an example of not understanding to what extent the institution of slavery was critical to the livelihood of the people that founded the country. And so you've heard of the 3/5 rule, right? An enslaved person was worth 3/5 of a white person, or would be counted as 3/5 of a white person. You might think that that is just an example of, degrading treatment of black people. And it is. But it's more than that. Folks, this is the Electoral College. So think about it. You get 100,000 black people that can't vote, that have the status of cows. But you get to count 60,000 of them when you put your population together. And how were congressional seats and votes in the Electoral College established? By the number of people who lived in your state. So you can see how two different articles of the Constitution that seem to have nothing to do with each other, they were bound together, and the purpose was to protect the institution of slavery. So as you go into the history of how our country was founded and the debates that people were having, this is a way to understand why racism has lasted for so long in this country. It was baked into the DNA of the founding documents. We assumed that it would always be this way. And last thing I'll say on this topic, just to bring an end to it, go to the secession statements at the beginning of the Civil War, because there are debates even now. There are people who want to tell you the Civil War wasn't about slavery. There are people who want to teach you that. And if you go to the secession statements, these are documents written by the states that left the Union. And as I told you before, when people think they're doing something important, they write stuff down. And so these documents tell you exactly why the states are leaving, and the common theme is this. You said we were going to get to keep these enslaved people, and now it looks like you're thinking of taking them away from us, and we ain't having it. We're leaving the Union. It's that important. We are willing to maim and murder American soldiers for the right to own people as property. So if you know those facts, that contributes to a discussion about the background of America that makes that discussion very different than if you don't know those facts. And that's just one example of what's out there. And let me just say this on this question. Y'all are thinking, man, this guy knows a lot, or maybe you're thinking that. The stuff that was in the film, I'd say 70% of that I didn't know until I was in my 50s. And that was one of the most difficult things about this film, is coming to the realization that there was all this information that I didn't know, and I felt like an idiot. And I was kicking myself in the butt thinking, you fool, you lazy, ignorant fool. How could you have not known this stuff? And that wasn't getting me anywhere. So I decided I needed to forgive myself and blame somebody else. So I blamed my teachers. How could you not have taught me this stuff? And that didn't last very long either, because then the thought is, well, how are they going to teach me something that they were never taught themselves? And so I stopped worrying about whose fault it was and started looking at the information that's out there that's not being shared. And that's what I want to encourage you to do, not to ignore what you're being taught. And even, your teachers who have the best of intentions, they may not know all this stuff. So I'm not saying ignore what you're being taught. I'm saying look further, because your minds are in the crosshairs. And if you're hearing stuff that says, this racism problem, it isn't that bad, we need to ignore that, I'm asking you to look behind that for the facts that will let you judge yourself about where we are in this country.
One more round of applause for Mr. Jeff Robinson.
Thank y'all for being here.
So Jeff is heading out, but I'm very excited to share that we have, we're going to start lunch just a little bit late. We're going to shorten our small group breakouts after lunch, just because we had to get started a little bit late today with some transportation issues. And I'm very, very excited. We have 2 more speakers and then someone to share a poem or spoken word with you. So the next speaker is Mr. Bob Flanow, and I'm very excited to introduce him. I'm going to have him come up now. He's another attorney in our community who has advanced justice. He is a leader among lawyers. He's been elected by attorneys to lead organizations that help the community. He was a public defender for many years, giving a voice to those charged with crimes. He frequently speaks before high school and college audiences on issues such as juvenile rights, and I know you'll appreciate hearing remarks from him today. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Flanow.
Once upon a time, all of us was in chains. Homie still doubled down, calling us some slaves. Atlanta was the mecca, building railroads and trains. Bear with me for a second. Let me put you on game. I'm looking at the teachers. They may not know. I'm looking at some of the judges. They may not know. Who knows where that came from? Oh, wow. One person? Where'd that come from? Go ahead. Not like us. Not like us. Not like us. Now, have you heard that song? Come on, people. Wake up. It's okay for us to be different. It's okay. And I'll go further than that. It's actually a great thing for us not to be the same. It's okay to be not like us. Why did I become a lawyer? A lot of reasons. One reason is my family. And I think back to the 50s with my parents. And my parents lived in a region where my mom had just graduated from college. And my dad was still in college. So they were trying to figure out a place to live. And my mom is like, you know, I'm going to go through the newspaper. And I'm going to figure out where can I rent. Because, you know, we didn't have the internet in the 50s, of course. So my mom goes to the newspaper. She finds these great houses. She'd call and say, hey, is that place available? They go, yeah. She'd get in their car. She'd drive down. She'd knock on the door. You know what? It's weird. The place was rented out. Like in about 10 minutes, somehow, someone rented out that house. My mom would go back, grab a little crumpled newspaper, and she'd kind of look through. She'd find another place. She'd call, is this place available? Of course it is. She'd go, drive down there, knock, knock, knock. Open up, they look at her, and can you believe it again? This is the second time that there was not a place available. And this happened time after time after time. Which state was this in? Guess. Someone. Where? Someone just yell it out. What state? Go ahead. Your guess, Washington. Anyone else have a guess of which state this happened in? This happened in Kirkland, Washington. And my mom was one of the first black teachers for the Kirkland School District, and she had to live with my dad in the basement of a white teacher because she was not allowed to live in Kirkland at the time. Why do I do this? Why did I become a lawyer? I became a lawyer because back in the day, you're going to learn about a case, Price versus Evergreen Cemetery. I grew up with the Price family. I knew the Price kids. I knew about that situation and how it affected those people. That's one of the reasons I became a lawyer. Why else did I become a lawyer? Because of some of the things that happened to me. I remember, because I had to kind of show my parents made it clear to me they were not going to buy me a car. But my dad told me, hey, kid, when you graduate from high school and when you're 18, you can do whatever you want. Well, I had no money. So I bought a motorcycle. I thought, well, this will kind of get it around. Mom was not thrilled about that, as you can imagine. But my dad said, well, I did tell him, he can do it. So I'm riding my motorcycle, and lo and behold, police would follow me. I got pulled over because I didn't know how to ride one, even though I had the special license. I got pulled over because I was trying to avoid an officer, and I didn't even know he was behind me. So I thought, you know what? I'm probably going to get rid of this motorcycle. I'm going to move up, and I'm going to get a Jeep. So I got a car, and through law school, I waited tables. That's how I paid for school, and that's how I paid for where to live. And I was driving home, closing a restaurant. It must have been on I-5 around 2 o'clock in the morning, and I got pulled over by an officer. He pulled me over. He goes, do you know why I pulled you over? I go, no, I have no idea why. He goes, because you threw a cigarette out of your car. I don't smoke. I've never smoked a day in my life. I've never tried a cigarette. But he got his flashlight, went through my car, and checked around. Another time I was driving, I got pulled over because my mirror was bent in too close to my car, and he didn't like the angle. Another time I was pulled over because he wanted to know about, did I commit a burglary in the area because someone stole guns? It happens, and you think, where is this, 1950s? No. And matter of fact, I remember when I came to this, wasn't this courtroom, it was 2 floors down. I was excited, a brand new attorney, I had a brand new case, I had my suit, brand new suit, I got my shoes, had to put in a credit card because I couldn't afford it. Walk in, and Jeff Robinson knows this, for sentencings, you got to report. Prosecutors got to say, hey, I'm here. Defendants say, I'm here. Attorneys say, I'm here. So I walk up. I say, hey, Ms. Bailiff, something just like right here. Robert Flanau, I'm here. She says, great. Oh, Mr. Flanau, you're not on the list today. Well, that's weird. So I go, okay, just check again. My name's weird. It's Flennaugh. It's hard to spell, so I get it. So I go, hey, Robert Flanau, please check again. They look. It's not there. You in the front, why couldn't this person find my name? You. Sure. Anyone else? Why? What's your guess? Absolutely right. You are 100% right. So when I walked in, all proud, saying, hey, I'm here, they said, oh, I don't see your name. And I looked and I saw my name. I didn't help her out. I go, I see my name. Do you see my name? And it kind of clicked. Oh, yes, Mr. Flanau, I see your name right here. Thurgood Marshall did inspire me. He inspired me because he helped us frame that we can make a difference. How do we defend the minority? How do we protect others? And I was asked to make a mention about the Constitution and how it affects others also. Why does the Constitution matter? Why does Thurgood Marshall matter? Because life matters. Does Kendrick Lamar versus Drake matter? Yeah, maybe, sure. It's stuff that's out there. LeBron versus Michael Jordan? Yeah, okay, that's kind of cool. We want to know that. Instagram? Yeah, who's on Instagram? The prom's going to come up for some people. Dances, everything else, that stuff matters. But so does life. And so does politics. The Constitution gives us the freedom to do what we want, but also the responsibility to protect others. We need rules. There's nothing that I liked better, well, first of all, about school is snow days. Snow days was number one. I loved a good snow day. But if it wasn't snow days, there's something about the substitute teacher, right? Oh, the substitute teacher. Why? Because it was a little different. You can come a little late. Ms. Freeman, I got to go to the bathroom again. Go ahead. She doesn't know. Oh, that test tomorrow, that was delayed. Oh, sure. But after a while, especially for the substitutes that were there for a while, you didn't want that person anymore. You realized you weren't learning, that there was no structure, and some of the bullies that were unchecked by the teacher came out even more. real quickly, there are three branches of government. There is the executive powers, that's the president. There's the legislative power, that's the Congress. And that's the judicial power, and that's what we're talking about by Thurgood Marshall. And all three branches are so important. But because this is Marshall's day, we're going to talk more about the judicial stuff. You can make a difference. You can make a difference. There are things that are happening in your backyard that are affecting the nation today. On January 27th, Judge Kuhnauer, just down the road at a courthouse, said that he blocked President Trump's executive order denying citizenship to children of parents living illegally in the United States. That's a judge who made a decision on his own, of course part of our judicial system, that affects everyone in the nation. You can make a difference. Even one person can make a difference. He's getting death threats because of it, but he stood up for what was right. On February 25th, and Jeff Robinson didn't tell you this, but one of his own partners, a former partner, Judge Whitehead, just down the road again, he said he blocked the President Trump's effort to halt the refugee of admission systems. And he argued, and Judge Whitehead found, that you can't nullify laws that are passed by Congress. But what's special about that? He looks like many of you. He's a black man, a little younger than me. He grew up in the Seattle area. He went to the University of Washington, went to Seattle U Law School. He is one of you. And by himself, he showed that he can make a difference. So what do I want? I want a call to action. I want you to do something. It doesn't matter your race, your nationality, your religion, or sex, but I want you to take a stand, and I want you to be informed. Justice Marshall said, the measure of a country's greatness is its ability to retain compassion in times of crisis. So here's my question for you. Are you compassionate? Are you looking out for injustice? Are you looking out for that minority? Are you looking to protect others when you can? Not like us, not like us, not like us. That's okay. It's a great thing. But, Justice Marshall said something else. He said, the United States has been called the melting pot of the world, but it seems to me that the colored man either missed getting in the pot or he got melted down. Are you getting melted down? Are you getting made and bent in a way that you don't want to be? I want you to stand up. You can make a difference, so I'm going to ask you. Can you make a difference? Oh, come on. That's not going to make a difference of anything. I want you to hurt Jeff Robinson's ears. Can you make a difference? Yes. Can you make a difference? Yes. One more time. Can you make a difference? Yes. Thank you.
Okay, now I'm going to invite Miss Shalise Seacrest to please come forward. She's another civil rights leader. Since she was 9 years old, she knew she wanted to be a civil rights lawyer. She has helped, and currently does lead the local NAACP chapter. Has been a public defender and attorney for families who have lost loved ones due to deadly use of force. She's been a part of organizations in our community that have helped find housing and other assistance for those in need. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Seacrest.
Stony the road we trod, bitter the chastening rod, felt in the days when hope unborn had died. Yet with the steady beat have not our weary feet come to a place for which our fathers sighed. The Black national anthem It is a beautiful reflection of the hard fought struggle for freedom in this country. Freedom to have control over your own bodies, freedom to love who you want to love, freedom to just be. I sing that song not because I think I can hold a note, I'm no Beyonce, but I sing that because it marks what this fight really is all about. Stony, the road we trod. It isn't easy. Listen, being Black in America isn't easy. My mama's mama, she would say, life for me ain't been no crystal stair. But although this road has been hard, we know how to be able to walk this journey forward because we get the wisdom of those who have come before us. It's those jewels, those nuggets. Shirley Chisholm had said, if you're not invited to the table, don't be afraid to bring your own chairs. Frederick Douglass talking about power concedes with nothing without a demand. And then, of course, for the man that we are here to celebrate today, Thurgood Marshall, he broke down and he made it simple. Equal means getting the same thing at the same time at the same place. Or in my house, I say, keep that same energy. It's those nuggets that we're able to hold on this journey to freedom, right? And though it's going to be hard, we know that we've got to keep moving on, yet with a steady beat. Things will come your way. As a civil rights attorney, let me let you know, this is not going to be the first or the last time that you will face an obstacle. Keep going. I want to give an example. Recently, after the election of Donald Trump, a Black man, the first Black person to ever hold a state position in elected office, Nick Brown, wonderful attorney, graduate from an HBCU, Morehouse, who was able to step into a position just being sworn into office for the lawsuit that we heard earlier, where he sued Donald Trump on a citizen right. He was able to do that thing when he faced that obstacle because he was standing upon the words of men like Thurgood Marshall. That 14th Amendment, it applies to everyone equally. Equal means getting the same thing at the same time, at the same place, yes? And so, even when you are facing obstacles, yet with a steady beat, have not our weary feet. Know that the journey can get hard. Keep going. Judge Hawk, you didn't make it this far to give up now. Keep going. There's going to be things. Keep going. Come to a place for which our fathers sighed. I declare and decree the moment you fight this battle, the victory is yours. But you've got to fight it. It's already yours. You've already won just by fighting, standing in the game. We got this far. Keep going. I want you to think about something that you have faced, an obstacle, a barrier. Maybe it's a play that you tried out for and that you had to challenge yourself to step outside of your comfort zone. And you did it and you became the star of that play, right? Keep going, fight the fight. How many of you are going to be the first time ever going to college in your family? Any first time generation? Raise them high, be proud of that. Yes, right? Yes. You're making history, you're breaking cycles, you're stepping into unfamiliar territory. That's what this journey is really about. Because sometimes you've got to start from the bottom and then you're what? Oh, come on, I know you've heard it. We started from the bottom, now we're what? Now we're here. I came to celebrate Black History today. Make some noise, give it up. No. I came to celebrate you today. Make some noise, give it up for yourselves. Once again, my name is Attorney Shalice Seacrest. I am your regional president of the biggest, the baddest, the boldest, and oldest civil rights organization in the nation. I'm talking about the one, the only NAACP. Thank you.
It is now my pleasure to invite up Mr. Anthony Settle. He is a special member of our court family who works in our juvenile courtroom as a court clerk, and he's going to provide some words about justice. Mr. Settle.
So before I start this poem, I wanted to start on the progression of this poem because it was just so cool for me. I'm originally from Maryland. I moved over here when I was 24 years old, and I'm 33 now. So when I was in DC area, I would go to these little coffee shops and do poetry, and it was really cool. I think being from that area where Howard, where HBCUs, you heard Morehouse, it's like Black excellence, and it's just so much knowledge, and it was just a blessing to be there. And this poem is probably my favorite that I've ever did because you guys heard Charles Hamilton Houston. After learning the stories about Thurgood Marshall, I was like, I need to know who Charles Hamilton Houston is. I need to know what a social engineer is, somebody that is forcing change. You guys heard about his story about how he faced lynching. What you guys didn't hear about is that he snuck into town in a coffin under the threat of death. How passionate do you have to be that someone's telling you they're going to kill you when they see you, and he's fighting for our rights? And honestly, I'm motivated, so I hope this poem is good. As you can tell, I'm a little nervous, so hopefully I switched this poem up for you guys. Separate but equal, that's what they said, but justice, nah, that was left for dead. Doors slammed shut, laws locked tight, but he ain't backing down. He came to fight. Courtroom floors, the battleground, and justice shaking at the sound of truth, of power, a name so bold, a man who refused to do what he was told. Jim Crow sneered, but he rose to fame, lit the fire, redefining the game. Smith, Sweat versus Painter, first hits fired, law school shook. That system got tired. Then came Brown, the board, the fight. He stood with kids because it was right. No more separate, no more divide. Justice stepped in, took its rightful side. Smith versus Allwright changed the day. Smith versus Allwright paved the way, changed the vote, changed the day. Through every case, through every stand, he put the power in our hands. No chains, no lines, no walls too tall. Justice ain't blind, it's meant for us all. With pride, I stand here today because of dreams I plan to reach. With pride, I give you my words, honoring a great man. With justice I stand, thanking Thurgood for changing this land.
Mr. Settle, thank you for those powerful words. One more round of applause, please, for Mr. Settle.